Buongiorno, prego. Si rinnova anche quest'anno per me il privilegio, come Presidente della Fondazione Giorgio Cini, di dare il benvenuto ai partecipanti della conferenza, di questa conferenza che ha eletto l'isola di San Giorgio Maggiore a sede privilegiata dei propri lavori. Ricordo che lo scorso anno, in apertura dei lavori, avevo sottolineato la felice coerenza tra i valori della Fondazione Cini e quelli del Soft Power Club. Se Venezia è stata un ponte tra le civiltà d'Oriente ed Occidente, può dirsi che la Fondazione Cini svolge come... prego.
This year again, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege to welcome, as the president of Fondazione Giorgio Cini, the participants of the Venice Soft Power Conference that has chosen San Giorgio Maggiore Island as the venue of its works. Last year, I remember that when I opened the works, I had stressed the consistency between the values of the Fondazione Cini and those of Soft Power Club.
Se Venezia è stato un ponte tra le civiltà d'Oriente ed Occidente, può dirsi che la Fondazione Cini svolge questo ruolo in modo emblematico, ponendosi come punto d'incontro tra umanesimo bizantino e umanesimo latino, grazie anche alla ricchissima biblioteca dell'abbazia che l'ha resa famosa nel mondo.
If Venice was a bridge between the East and the West, we can say that Fondazione Cini plays symbolically a symbolic role because it is a meeting point between Byzantium and Latin humanism, thanks to its very wealthy library of the Abbey.
Da 70 anni l'isola di San Giorgio, con i suoi istituti e centri di ricerca, è luogo privilegiato di studio, di dialogo e di confronto nell'ambito della cultura umanistica.
So for 70 years, San Giorgio Island has been a privileged center for studies on the humanistic culture.
Ma non solo. Essa funge anche da centro di innovazione e di sperimentazione nell'obiettivo di superare le divisioni e incomprensioni che tuttora sussistono tra saperi umanistici e saperi scientifici.
But even more so, it is a place of innovation and experimentation to overcome the divisions and the misunderstandings between humanistic and scientific knowledge.
La complessità dei problemi che dobbiamo affrontare richiede collaborazioni sempre più strette tra tali saperi.
The complexities that we're facing requires a closer connection between those knowledges.
Come ha sottolineato la Presidente della Commissione europea, Ursula von der Leyen, in occasione dell'entrata in vigore del regolamento europeo sulla governance dei dati, la messa a disposizione dei dati delle ricerche scientifiche che è fondamentale al fine di armonizzarli il più possibile con altri settori disciplinari.
As said by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, when the European regulation on data governance became effective, making available data of scientific research is essential to make them as harmonic as possible with other sectors.
Il progetto Archive nato qui nel 2018 per la digitalizzazione del patrimonio storico e artistico custodito a San Giorgio, pone la nostra istituzione all'avanguardia nel settore della digital innovation, tema centrale dei lavori di domani.
So the archive project, which started in 2018 for the digitalization of the historical and artistic heritage of San Giorgio Island, places us at the forefront of the topic that will be discussed tomorrow, that of digitalization.
Non occorre, credo, aggiungere altro per spiegare perché Francesco Rutelli, quando mi propose di organizzare alla Fondazione Cini sull'isola di San Giorgio la conferenza internazionale dedicata al soft power, incontrò la mia pronta adesione.
I don't need to add anything else to explain why, when Francesco Rutelli proposed to organize at Fondazione Giorgio Cini here the conference, international conference on soft power, encountered my straightforward approval.
Devo peraltro osservare che l'anno scorso, all'inaugurazione della conferenza, si respirava un'aria di fiducia. Aleggiava la convinzione diffusa di essere vicini alla fine della crisi sanitaria internazionale. Tutti noi confidavamo con un ottimismo che sembrava ragionevole che avremmo presto vissuto una nuova fase di sviluppo e di crescita diffusa.
I should also add that last year, at the opening of the conference, there was an atmosphere of trust. We had the conviction to be close to the end of the international health crisis. We all believed that we would soon encounter a new development and growth phase.
12 mesi dopo, invece, i venti sono bruscamente cambiati e oggi ci ritroviamo coinvolti in una realtà più difficile e complessa.
12 months later, unfortunately, the winds have changed and we're faced with a more challenging situation than ever.
A parte il succedersi di insidiose varianti del Covid, lo scenario odierno è dominato dal conflitto tra Russia ed Ucraina, che ha riportato la guerra in Europa, oltre ad accompagnarsi alla più grave crisi energetica degli ultimi 50 anni.
And even more so, we had the insidious COVID variants, and today's scenario shows the Russia-Ukraine war that has brought back war to Europe and is also accompanied by the worst energetic crisis of the last 50 years.
Se non bastasse, questo 2022 verrà ricordato come uno degli anni più torridi mai registrati nella storia, confermando che stiamo vivendo una crisi climatica che sembra fuori controllo e che rappresenta una minaccia per la sopravvivenza umana non meno concreta e distruttiva degli stessi arsenali nucleari.
And additionally, 2022 will be remembered as one of the warmest years in history, and the climate crisis seems to be out of control, and it's an equal threat to human survival as nuclear arsenals.
A un livello più locale, Venezia, il cui destino credo che si possa dire rappresenta una preoccupazione primaria non solo per la Fondazione Cini, ma per l'intera umanità, è scesa sotto la simbolica soglia di 50.000 residenti, a conferma di una emorragia demografica dalle gravi ripercussioni sociali ed economiche, e che sembra inarrestabile.
At a local level, Venice, that is a concern for Fondazione Cini and for all humankind, has gone down the symbolic threshold of 50,000 local residents, and it confirms a demographic hemorrhage that has serious repercussions on society and economy.
Un quadro inquietante, un orizzonte che appare oscuro, ma proprio l'estrema complessità e rischiosità del tempo che stiamo vivendo, un tempo di transizione verso nuovi modelli di sviluppo che risultino compatibili per l'intero pianeta, dimostra l'importanza degli argomenti che saranno trattati in questa terza Venice Soft Power Conference.
The situation is really disturbing and dark, but the complexity of this time we're living in, this transition towards new development models that are compatible for the entire planet, shows how important the topics that this third conference is going to deal with are.
Confido che all'insegna della creatività e della competenza, della responsabilità e dell'equilibrio, che sono caratteristiche distintive dell'approccio promosso dal Soft Power Club, da questi 2 giorni di confronto emergano soluzioni innovative e praticabili, anche, aggiungo, su scala delle comunità locali.
I trust that in the name of creativity and competence, responsibility and balance, which are typical of the Soft Power Club, these 2 days bring out solutions that are innovative and applicable also at a local level.
Ringraziando per l'attenzione, rivolgo a tutti augurio di buon lavoro.
Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Grazie Presidente Bazzoli, grazie per un benvenuto tutt'altro che formale. È il mio onore adesso dare la parola al Sindaco Luigi Brugnaro. It's my pleasure to give the floor to the Mayor. Luigi Brugnaro acts as an honorary chairman of the Soft Power Club because the City of Venice decided to support, since the very beginning, our common goals. Sindaco Brugnaro ha deciso dall'inizio di essere presidente onorario del club, rappresentando la sua città, una città che è sfidata, tu l'hai detto, dal cambiamento climatico, è una città che ha una funzione universale, un riconoscimento universale che ha intrapreso importanti cambiamenti e quindi le sue parole anche certamente non saranno formali. I want to underline how important is the role of the Mayor of Venice, because he leads a universal city, a city that speaks to the world, a fragile city, and every one of us is expecting from him, from his administration, great changes to improve that situation and to meet the challenges with success. That will be a universal success. La riuscita di Venezia è una riuscita per noi tutti e gliela auguriamo. Do la parola a Luigi Brugnaro.
Grazie Francesco. Grazie a Francesco Rutelli perché in maniera testarda e caparbia ha voluto portare avanti questa intanto iniziativa del Soft Power Club, che è di fatto il riconoscimento del ruolo della diplomazia e il ruolo della discussione tra persone che anche la pensano in maniera diversa. Credo che questo sia la base della nostra civiltà e il fatto che abbia scelto Venezia ormai da diversi anni per poter invitare tutti voi a discutere qui dei grandi temi di fatto mondiali, Però appunto il tema vero è che stiamo discutendone, stiamo parlandone, se tutti ci ascoltiamo e soprattutto ascoltiamo le esperienze operative, i successi e anche i fallimenti o gli insuccessi, proprio per poter migliorare, per poter migliorare la vita di tutti.
I would like to thank Francesco Rutelli because he has stubbornly brought forward this initiative of the Soft Power Club to acknowledge the role of dialogue and diplomacy among people, also people who have different ideas. And I would like to thank him for choosing Venice for the third year in a row now to hold this conference on worldwide topics. And it's good that we can listen to each other's achievements as well as failure to learn from each other.
È un piacere, un onore, ci fa molto piacere che questa giornata inaugurale sia qui alla Giorgio Cini e per cui voglio ringraziare in primis il Presidente Giovanni Bazzoli, ma insieme a lui tutto il suo staff e tutte le persone che hanno contribuito per realizzare queste giornate. Ovviamente in primis voglio ringraziare il Presidente della Repubblica che ha mandato un saluto che poi penso Francesco leggerà. Lo ringrazio perché è stato un grande amico di Venezia, lo è stato tra l'altro non a parole ma nei fatti, cosa che conta per me almeno il doppio. Però è giusto, è il mio dovere doverlo dichiarare, un grande italiano, il primo italiano, ed è un grande amico di Venezia e dell'idea della resilienza rispetto appunto alle difficoltà che noi ci siamo trovati ad affrontare.
So it's a real pleasure that the opening day of the conference is here at the Giorgio Cini Foundation. And I would like to thank its president, Mr. Giovanni Bazzoli, and his staff for organizing and for having us these days. And I would also like to thank first and foremost the president of the Italian Republic, who also sent his greetings that I think Mr. Rutelli will read, who's always been a friend of Venice, not just with words but with his actions.
Poi devo ringraziare il primo ministro Draghi per la serietà con cui ha sempre affrontato i problemi e per come ha aiutato e diretto i ministri che ho l'onore di avere qui al mio fianco e che ci hanno oggettivamente ascoltato e in qualche modo interpretato. Lo dico sempre con fatti concreti, per cui grazie al primo ministro Draghi, io l'ho votato fino alla fine, l'ho proposto addirittura per la Presidenza della Repubblica, un grande italiano che ci sta facendo onore nel mondo. E per cui di conseguenza è un grande onore avere qui al mio fianco il ministro Daniele Franco, un grande amico di Venezia, non perché lo dico io ma perché lo è nella realtà, cioè sono persone che credono davvero che questa sia la città dove ci sfideremo con i risultati e non con le chiacchiere. Lo stesso devo dire grazie di essere qui al ministro Enrico Giovannini, con cui abbiamo anche discusso ma con cui abbiamo trovato sempre dei punti di contatto, cito le grandi navi. E voglio ringraziare su questo il Presidente dell'Autorità Portuale, la Capitaneria di Porto che ci stanno aiutando per trovare la soluzione, anche se forse con i governi precedenti avremmo potuto accelerare di più prima, ma insomma col se e col ma non si fa niente. Con questo governo abbiamo sbloccato alcune cose. Con la struttura dei ministeri stiamo lavorando per recuperare quel tempo perduto, per cui grazie anche al Ministro Giovannini e voglio salutare anche Paolo Gentiloni, anche se non è qua, ma lo conosco personalmente, quando era Presidente del Consiglio ha aiutato Venezia. Devo dire non ho mai trovato resistenze a Roma, devo dire, ho ringraziato anche in questo senso tutto lo staff del Ministro, per cui insomma lo saluterò appena lo vedo, ad oggi è commissario, un ruolo molto importante, che sia presente al soft power ci dà molta fiducia.
So I would like to thank Prime Minister Draghi for how he's always seriously tackled the problems of our country, and for how he's always led his ministers who are also here by my side and who have always listened to our problems and tried to help us. And I voted also for him to become the president of the Republic of Italy. So I would like to thank Minister Franco for always being a friend for real of Venice and for sharing the achievements of Venice and with us. And also Minister Giovannini, we also had arguments in the past, but always found agreements, for example, on the big ships. And for this, I would also like to thank the President of the Port Harbour's office for finding a solution, even if it was a bit late, but now it's too late to regret past decisions. And I would like to thank Mr. Gentiloni, our former Prime Minister, who has always helped Venice. He was not here in person. As soon as I will see him in person, I will thank him, and I'm pleased that he's here with a message.
Non sono abituato a fare ringraziamenti formali, per cui quello che dico lo penso. È chiaro che dobbiamo anche fare una serie di sottolineature a persone che in questi anni difficilissimi per tutto il mondo, ma a Venezia in particolare, hanno dato un contributo davvero sostanziale. E mi riferisco alle persone di buona volontà, ai tanti volontari, alle tante persone che ci hanno aiutato prima per superare quello che è stata l'acqua grande, quello che è successo, questa devastazione della città, che nel momento in cui stavamo per, diciamo in qualche modo, riposarci dopo aver ricostruito tutto il danno, anche qui va ringraziato il governo perché assieme anche al Presidente Luca Zaia sono stato io nominato commissario di quell'emergenza. Noi abbiamo rifuso i soldi fino a 20.000 euro, come era nei miei poteri di commissario, alle persone, sia i singoli, singole famiglie, sia le strutture economiche che hanno avuto i danni. Adesso chiedo a questo governo se ce la farà, alla protezione civile di fatto, di vedere se riesce a sbloccare le somme, quelle superiori ai 20.000 euro, perché ci sono stati bar, locali, eccetera, che hanno avuto evidentemente danni molto più elevati. Lo dico semplicemente come ricordo, perché è un impegno che il governo precedente si era preso, speriamo che in questi giorni si possa fare qualcosa. E il ringraziamento va dato per cui alle istituzioni che hanno collaborato con me per risorgere, per far ripulire la città, che voi trovate, era una città devastata e voi trovate che è in ordine. E bisogna ricordare il prefetto, il signor prefetto, bisogna ricordare il comandante dei carabinieri, il comandante della Guardia di Finanza, il questore, va ricordato il capo dei vigili del fuoco che in quei giorni era con me a tirare su la gente, a salvare le persone, ma bisogna ricordare anche gli uomini e le donne della CTV, la nostra compagnia di trasporti, le ditte private, i tassisti che hanno assistito la gente, hanno continuato a assistere la gente in difficoltà. Lo dico perché la città che voi trovate è una città dove c'è grande collaborazione istituzionale e sociale. E questo credo che non sarà mai finito per me di dire grazie. E abbiamo subito dopo affrontato la pandemia. Il capitolo della pandemia lo faccio dopo, intanto facciamo la traduzione.
I'm not used to thanking out of formality, but I say what I really think in my heart. And so I would like to thank all the people who helped Venice. For example, the volunteers who helped during the Acqua Grande, the flood, the high tide. And when we were feeling easier after rebuilding the city, also thanks to the government who appointed me and Mr. Zaia, the Veneto governor, as commissioners, things started getting worse. In any case, as commissioners, we could reimburse both households and companies up to 20,000 euros. And now I would like to ask the government if it would be possible to increase that amount, since a promise had been made by the previous government. So Venice, thanks to all these people resurrected from its ashes, and the people that I'd like to thank are the prefect, the chief of Carabinieri, the chief of the local police, the Guardia di Finanza, the firefighters, ACTV staff, so the local transportation company staff, all the private businesses as well as taxi drivers who helped people when they were at their worst. And Venice is an example of social and institutional cooperation, and it will never stop doing this. And then we had the pandemic.
Racconto questa piccolissima storia, sarò breve, però voglio raccontare agli ospiti che abbiamo qua che cos'è il soft power. Vuol dire riconoscere il lavoro degli altri, vuol dire rispettare il lavoro degli altri, perché se no facciamo solo dichiarazioni di principio. Nella realtà Venezia dimostra la bellezza che vedete, la pulizia, la sicurezza che c'è in città, dimostra il lavoro che è di tante persone. Va riconosciuto, io ho il dovere di riconoscerlo. Dopo questo momento di grande crisi, dove appunto, ripeto, il governo è intervenuto, siamo riusciti ad accelerare quello che non c'era mai fatto, che qualcuno pensava non si potesse fare, cioè il MOSE. Abbiamo alzato il MOSE. Vedere il mare in tempesta con 2 metri di dislivello di acqua in tempesta, con all'interno in laguna le acque calme e quiete, è un ringraziamento che va fatto alla capacità, alla perseveranza di tante persone. Abbiamo dimostrato che questi cambiamenti climatici, con la tecnologia, con la tecnica, con il nostro ingegno italiano, possiamo risolverli, possiamo affrontarli. Questo vale anche, è un insegnamento che ci viene dalla storia, dai veneziani che deviavano i fiumi per non far interrare la laguna. Lo dimostrano le opere d'arte che voi vedete in giro, cioè sono il frutto di tanta tecnologia, di tanta scienza, della fiducia dell'uomo per la conoscenza, ed è quella conoscenza che poi ci ha portato ad affrontare l'epidemia, perché noi siamo entrati come tutta Italia in questo grande problema. Però vorrei ricordare a tutti che qui a Venezia intanto la gente, come dappertutto, si chiudeva nelle case col terrore di poter morire, e molti sono morti. C'erano persone che lavoravano per portare via la spazzatura, c'erano persone che lavoravano per continuare a tenere aperti i trasporti, persone che continuavano a lavorare per la nostra sicurezza. Queste persone vanno ringraziate. Gli eroi degli ospedali, persone che sono morte per salvarci la vita. Credo che questo sia il soft power, cioè partire anche dal basso. Le grandi iniziative del futuro devono partire dagli esempi positivi che la nostra civiltà, la nostra società testimoniamo che abbiamo avuto. E passato questo sembrava dovesse, appunto lo diceva prima il Presidente Bazzoli, avevamo una moderata sensazione di ottimismo, è arrivata questa grande crisi economica, probabilmente anche scatenata dalla guerra in Ucraina. Su questo noi abbiamo preso posizioni a Venezia molto definite, molto chiare, molto sicure. Io personalmente a casa mia ho ospitato 2 signore ucraine, 2 mamme ucraine con 3 bambini a casa mia. Tutta la comunità veneziana, ma anche italiana a casa propria ha ospitato persone che sono scappate, letteralmente scappate con quello che avevano indosso, con le macchine, perché bombardavano le case. Per cui noi abbiamo davvero aiutato la causa ucraina. Abbiamo per cui sostenuto il governo nella scelta internazionale, ma non solo. A Venezia, assieme al Presidente Zelensky, abbiamo inaugurato in occasione della Biennale un padiglione che è la Misericordia, che potete andare a visitare se credete. La Misericordia è una grande scuola del 1500, dove c'è un padiglione dell'Ucraina dove raccontiamo la guerra. Il Presidente Zelensky si è collegato in diretta, assieme a una serie di amici che abbiamo appunto in Ucraina, abbiamo fatto vedere che cos'è l'effetto della guerra, perché se volete andare a vedere questa stessa iniziativa l'avevo iniziata con Gino Strada, vogliamo adesso con la vedova Strada, inaugureremo alla Giudecca un museo per raccontare quanto brutta e quanto pericolosa è la guerra, per cui l'idea è quella della pace, ma non la pace a tutte le condizioni. Per cui la cultura, la Biennale e le iniziative che abbiamo sviluppato sono quelle proprio di poter garantire un dialogo su Venezia, e noi pensiamo che però queste siano guerre tra stati, non sono guerre di popolo. E per cui questo non vuol dire che non dobbiamo tenere aperti i canali sociali, i canali umani tra noi, il popolo ucraino, il popolo russo. Dobbiamo assolutamente arrivare a una pace, pensare che a Venezia si possa discutere di questo, assolutamente siamo convinti che si creda e si possa fare.
I would like to say an anecdote now that clearly explains what soft power is. It means recognizing the work of other people and acknowledging it and thanking them for this. And for helping people, I have to thank Venice. I have to thank many people because after the crisis, we were able to lift the Mose barriers. And even when the sea was at storm with 2 meters of waves, the lagoon was quiet thanks to these people that I would like to thank, because in Italy we have excellencies in technology, technique, engineering, and also history has taught us how, for example, to deviate the courses of the river to avoid putting the lagoon under soil and gravel. So it's this knowledge that allowed us to make these fast changes. And then came the pandemic, and in Venice, people were locked in, fearing they would die, but still other people kept collecting garbage, kept running the transportation. There were hospital heroes who helped people infected, and eventually some even died. And so this is something that should be an example for all. Then when we thought things were getting better, we had the economic crisis, probably due to the Ukraine-Russia war, and Venice took a clear stance against the war. For example, I accommodated 2 Ukrainian mothers with their 3 children, but I know that other citizens did the same to help and support these people. And we also had a pavilion, a Ukrainian pavilion at Biennale at Scuola della Misericordia with Zelensky, President Zelensky, who made some opening remarks on a live stream and talked against the war. Same thing with Gino Strada, and now with his widow, we are planning to open a museum in Giudecca that is basically against the war, that shows how bad war is and that promotes peace. And we also have cultural initiatives. We have Biennale. In Venice, there is a lot of dialogue. I also think that wars are between states, not between people. So we also always should keep our channels open, our communication channels open for people of Ukraine and Russia, and Venice can do it.
Cercherò di essere sempre più breve, che abbiamo fatto tante cose, sempre più breve. Abbiamo a Venezia inaugurato la Fondazione che candida Venezia capitale mondiale della sostenibilità, sempre in linea con queste iniziative. E qui devo ringraziare il Ministro Renato Brunetta, il Presidente Luca Zaia e tutte le grandi istituzioni veneziane. Non le cito tutte così risparmio, però sono meritevoli del loro appoggio. Ringrazio ovviamente le università in particolare, perché il gruppo generale che ci ospita tra l'altro, ma le università, perché con loro abbiamo un progetto di raddoppiare il numero degli studenti, perché abbiamo visto che la popolazione universitaria può essere un grande atu per la città di Venezia. Anche su questo mi permetto di dire una parola sulla denatalità, visto che il Presidente l'ha citata. Lo dico come riferimento di verità. Sì, i residenti del centro storico sono calati sotto i 50.000, però è cambiato il modo di vivere le città. Tutte le città italiane, tranne Milano e Bologna, si stanno spopolando, perché c'è un tema che si chiama denatalità, cioè facciamo meno figli, 1,2 figli per coppia. Vuol dire che nel tempo questa nazione si sta estinguendo, per cui dobbiamo creare le politiche per la famiglia, le politiche per le mamme. In città ci sono, oltre ai residenti, ci sono stabilmente gli studenti universitari, parliamo di una popolazione tra i 20 e i 25 mila persone. Stiamo parlando anche che ci sono almeno 10.000 non residenti ma stabilmente domiciliati, che però vivono in città, mangiano. Abbiamo fatto delle analisi col consumo dell'acqua, per cui questi cambiamenti sociali non ci devono impensierire, non si sta desertificando la città, sta cambiando pelle. È evidente che dobbiamo accompagnare questi cambiamenti con una grande collaborazione collettiva e per cui ragionare sulle periferie, per cui sulla sicurezza dei luoghi, sulla sicurezza per le donne, sulla sicurezza e la pulizia dei luoghi, questo attirerà lavoro, attira benessere sociale e ti consente in maniera moderata, delicata, rispettosa di poter fare riunioni come questa, perché senza la sicurezza e senza la pulizia queste riunioni purtroppo non vengono fatte, perché i cittadini, quelli che vivono nelle periferie, non capirebbero la classe dirigente. Allora, la classe dirigente è classe dirigente se pensa alle persone più deboli. Finisco col dire che le guerre le fanno gli stati, ma la pace e la convivenza si costruisce nelle città, insieme alla gente. Grazie ancora.
So I know that I'm saying a lot of things, but Venice is really doing a lot lately. So we are planning to open a new foundation for running as World Sustainability Capital. And for this, I would like to thank Minister Brunetta, Governor Zaia, all the Venice institutions, Generali Group, and most of all the universities who are attracting a lot of students to Venice. And I would like also to make a point on what Mr. Bazzoli said about the decline in birth rates. It's true that there are less than 50,000 residents now in Venice, but this is also due to a change of the situation in all the Italian cities. Only Milan and Bologna are left unchanged. But this is because people are making less children, so we should promote policies for mothers and for households and for families. But for example, in the city of Venice, even if we don't have residents, we have many students, between 20 and 30,000. We also have 10,000 people who are not residents but who live permanently here. And we notice this from reading the water measurements, the water bills. So this is not the desertification of the city, but a change of skin, and we need to accompany this change, especially in the suburbs of the city, to ensure safety for all the people, so that we can promote employment and well-being, and so that we can hold meetings like this one we are doing today. And I would like to end on this note that war is between states, whereas peace is made by the cities and by their citizens peacefully living together. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, caro Luigi. Now we start our session, and I really would like to thank everybody for being here. I can't say hello to such a great attendance, but I think we will have the opportunity for networking and meeting each other during the continuation of our conference. Now we start with the IED session. IED is a think tank in Brussels, and Michael Bursago is Director General. Thank you very much. And the issue is something that is the most important today for all of us. Climate, energy, environmental transitions in Europe. Between the 2015 Paris Agreement and the EU Fit for 55, and I add Repower EU strategies, the global context and the dramatic consequences and shifts generated by the Ukraine war. Saying it plainly, how to reach an agreement at the global level when war and divergence and strategic competitions are in, and how to involve ordinary people, that is so important if energy costs and tariffs are so high. So our speakers, so important, are asked to talk, explain, and answer to these two great questions and everything they want to discuss with us. We will have the intervention by the Minister of the Economy and Finance, Daniele Franco. We're very honored having you here. Then a video message by Paolo Gentiloni, EU Commissioner for Economic Affairs. Enrico Giovannini, Minister of Sustainable Infrastructures and Mobility, and I would add also one of the most acknowledged people in our country about sustainability and the environment. And finally, and that is very important, a direct connection with Amitabh Kant. Amitabh is a member of the Soft Power Club. He is the CEO of National Institution for Transforming India, and he has also been appointed as the India Sherpa for the next G20. Europe is very important, but Europe emits around 8% of global CO2. India is a country with 1 billion people. They need energy. Their transition is much more complicated. So we discuss about Italy, starting from Italy, with a European perspective and a global responsibility, but I hope also in order to reach ordinary people needs, worries, and hopes. So please, Ministro Franco, you get the floor, but just after my last communication, that is, allow me to say, maybe the most important. The message we received from Sergio Mattarella, Presidente della Repubblica Italiana, indirizzato a me, al Soft Power Club. Ci scrive il Presidente Mattarella: la sessione della Soft Power Conference, impegnata nella riflessione sulle più attuali questioni di respiro globale che riguardano l'umanità intera, ha assunto come tematiche della sua agenda i cambiamenti climatici, il multilateralismo nelle relazioni internazionali, le opportunità connesse al crescente sviluppo delle tecnologie digitali, nonché la necessità di implementare un'economia globale sostenibile ed equilibrata, sollecitando l'impegno di esponenti della società civile, di esperti e studiosi provenienti da numerosi paesi e di rappresentanti di organismi internazionali.
So I'm going to read a message that was sent to me by President Mattarella, addressed to me and the Soft Power Club. So the Soft Power Club, the Soft Power Conference session of today will be talking about global topics, for example, things that concern humankind, so climate change, multilateralism in international relationships, opportunities linked to the growing development of the digital technologies, as well as the need to implement a sustainable and balanced global economy.
Sollecitando pure, ci arriva?
Requiring the commitment of experts of the civil society and scholars coming from several countries.
Si tratta di sfide di fronte alle quali si trova la comunità internazionale nella sua interezza, rese ancora più impegnative in questa fase funestata dalla guerra intrapresa dalla Federazione Russa contro l'Ucraina, che rende più fragile ogni risposta comune. A tutti i partecipanti alla conferenza mi è grato rivolgere l'augurio di buon lavoro unitamente al saluto più cordiale. Sergio Mattarella.
These challenges are faced by the international community as a whole, and they are exacerbated by the war between Russia and Ukraine, which makes everything more difficult. So I would like to wish all the participants an excellent, pleasant session together with my best greetings.
Grazie. Ministro Franco.
So, thank you, Francesco, and thank you very much to the Soft Power Club. I believe there are some PowerPoint slides which should be made available on the screen. Let me first say that it is a great pleasure to be here today in this very nice location in this marvelous town. I will offer you some reflections on the issue of sustainability from an economist point of view. I wonder whether slides are available. Yes. Okay. Sustainability is an evolving concept. Economists have been dealing with the issue of sustainability over the last couple of centuries. Basically, this is an analytical tool for looking to the future, for guiding policy making. I will go rather faster because I don't have much time. But for economy, sustainability has for a long time been focused on the issue of public debt. The basic concept about economic policy sustainability is rather simple. An economic policy is sustainable when it can be sustained, when it can be kept unchanged over time. It is unsustainable when it tends to lead to a crisis, for instance, a public debt bankruptcy. As I said, economists focus on public debt issue for a long time. Over the last two decades, we saw two major developments. On one hand, we focus on the issue of demographic change, on the issue of population aging, that is on the issue of the sustainability of the welfare system, pension and health policies. More recently, we are also focusing, as many other experts from different fields, on the issue of the environment. Let me say that the basic issue is how we compare the well-being of people living today with the well-being of people living tomorrow. That is, how much should we discount the future? This is basically an ethical issue. The issue is that of the concern that we should have about those living in the future. When a policy is not sustainable, this would damage future generations. This applies to public debt defaults, but it also applies evidently to environmental issues. So the key aspect is in all fields that of balancing the needs of the current and the future generation, which is essentially an ethical issue. Economists talk about the so-called intertemporal preference rate. It is the rate at which we discount future developments. If the discount rate is zero or is very low, this implies that the weight attached to the well-being of somebody should not be lowered if this person lives in the future. On the other hand, there are good reasons for discounting future developments, taking into consideration that productivity leads to a growth in per capita consumption. But apart from theoretical developments and discussion, what is most important is what is the discount rate actually implicit in policies, which, as we all know, often tends to be rather high. As I said, in recent decades, environmental sustainability has become crucial. I'm quoting here a report by the European Commission about 3 years ago. But let me remind you that this is not the only challenge that we face. I mean, as in the previous presentations, the issue of demographic change was frequently mentioned by President Basoli and by the mayor of the town. This, we should always keep that in mind. The cost of inaction in terms of the environmental changes can be enormous. I don't have to repeat what has been stressed by several reports. Let me simply quote an IMF report of last year. The IMF stressed that climate change presents a major threat to people's lives and to countries' long-term growth and prosperity. Professor Nordhaus, in his Nobel Prize lecture in December 2019, was even more direct in stressing, as you can see from the second quote, the impact of inactions for the environment. Why do we need exceptional efforts to deal with environmental changes? Well, you can see in these charts how long it took to our economies in the past to move to different forms of energy sources, coal, oil, natural gas, and to the right side, the modern renewables. As you can see, it always took a lot of time. This implies that technological changes require time and require big investments. One point to be considered is that, as I said, managing the transition will be very costly. We will have to invest a lot on infrastructure. I believe my colleague Enrico Giovannini will focus on this issue. Let me only remind you that the investment and infrastructure that will come from the public, but as well as from the private sector, the burden for these investments will have to be dealt with in combination with what we are spending for health and long-term care and pension systems. As we all know, we are living in a period of unprecedented increases in energy prices, in particular in gas prices. This is partly related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but the issues at stake here are even broader than that. Our country, as well as other European countries, reacted moving along 3 lines. First of all, mitigating the unfavorable impact of high energy prices on firms and households and citizens. Second, reducing reliance on Russian energy sources, for instance, diversifying gas supplies. Third, avoiding the need for rationing in the coming winter. It is important that these developments and our reaction to higher energy prices should not modify our medium-term targets. It is important that the short-term response does not modify our path toward eliminating CO2 transition. This implies that the diversification strategy should rely on boosting and accelerating the deployment of renewable energy capacity. We will also have to compensate in the future for the short-term increase in emissions. What tools should we use to cope with these developments? A number of studies focused on the different tools. I think there is a wide consensus that several tools are required. First of all, research and development, then emission regulation, public investment, and carbon pricing. In particular, many economists and inter alia, some important international institutions like the IMF are focusing on the use of carbon pricing as a way for increasing energy efficiency and investing in clean technologies. Financial markets can contribute to the transition in many ways, in smoothing the impact of the shocks, in facilitating the transition. There is an issue of the role of the green bond in drawing from private resources to finance green investments. One important issue to be considered is that climate is a global public good because, as we all know, emissions, externalities, and spillover do not stop at borders. And this raises two important issues. First of all, how should we allocate the burden of the transition across the different countries? Should we look at the flows or should we look at the accumulated stock of past emissions? This is a core issue. I mean, it has been mentioned a few minutes ago, the role of India, which has in the past emitted very little, but is emitting now very much. So, and in this regard, Europe and countries like India and China are in a very different position. In the chart here, you can see the accumulated past emission of different areas of the world, and you can see that Europe and North America contributed a lot to past emissions, although they are contributing less to current emissions. Second issue here is how to deal with emission incorporated in imported goods. The European Union developed an important strategy. I believe Commissioner Gentiloni will talk about the role of Next Generation EU and Repower EU, so I think I will skip this aspect. The role of the G20. The G20 includes the 20 most important countries across the world. And I believe G20 is crucial in moving ahead in coordinating the international effort. Last year, Italy chaired the G20, and one of our priorities, apart from international taxation and the fight against future pandemics, was that of climate change. We worked a lot on achieving common views across G20 countries. And here you can see some statement by G20 countries. First of all, the G20 leader declaration of the end of October, where you can see that the G20 country agreed on moving ahead in spite of very different economic situations. What is very much important in the current international context, which is very difficult because of the war in Ukraine, is that we should try to keep the G20 operational for the future, because we will need a forum where we can discuss with all major countries in the world attending and contributing. Coming quickly to the conclusions, first of all, Environmental issues are very much important, but they should not be addressed in isolation. We need to devise a strategy dealing with environment, but also with the other challenges that we have to face. First of all, for Western countries, European countries, the issue of demography is very much important. We have to ensure the sustainability of our pension and health system, and together the sustainability of our environment. In all these dimensions, timely action and preventions are very much important. This applies to pension reform, but this applies also to environmental changes. The sooner we act, the better. As I said, international cooperation is a key factor for climate. It is a key factor also for fighting pandemics and future pandemics. One issue to be kept in mind is the fact that climate change will affect countries in different ways. We all know that countries in Africa, first of all, will be much more affected than countries in Europe, and especially in Northern Europe. Within our societies, the impact of climate change is very much different. I'm not going to tell you the details about that, but I think several studies pointed to this aspect. So in devising a strategy for climate change, we should keep these two aspects, cross-country differences, and within societies difference well in mind. Final slide. This applies to climate change, but not only to climate change, how to make the future more important in policy making, and I believe your club is very much important from this point of view. In recent decades, economies devoted a lot of effort to developing indicators about financial sustainability, fiscal sustainability, the sustainability of pension and health systems. Now, it is important that these efforts are now replicated for environmental sustainability. We also need more articulated analysis of the available options. I think why the final objective is clear. The transition path toward removing emissions is still open for discussion. What is the role of natural gas in the transition? What is the role of nuclear power in the transition? What is the role of hydrogen in the transition? Finally, we must invest more in the education about sustainability. We need a higher demand for sustainability by our citizens. We need a stronger interest in the future. And here we come back to the issue of the discount rate, the way we discount the future. I'm quoting at the very end of my presentation the Stern review on the economic of climate change, which was one of the earlier reports, studies about the impact of the environment. And the Stern review stated that a discount rate greater than 0.1%, that is slightly greater than zero, would be compatible with the extinction of human race, saying that if we discount the future, attach the future a weight which is less important than the weight we attach to our current well-being, we are going to be in a very, very risky situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ministro Daniele Franco. You gave us a very, very important speech and contribution. I ask La Regia to give the floor to Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni.
It's a pleasure to take part in this soft power conference. I'd like to thank my friend Francesco Rutelli for the invitation. In a year marked by the return of war in the European continent, hosting a conference on soft power can feel like swimming against the current. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a brutal and tragic display of hard power. It's a direct challenge to the rules-based international order painstakingly built in the decades after the World War II. And it threatens to divide the world across blocks, putting international cooperation at risk. In this new geopolitical context, what space is there left for soft power? I believe there is plenty of this space. As a result of the war, the world as a whole is facing enormous challenges: broken supply chains, global food insecurity, rising inflation, economic uncertainty. These challenges have not only arrived at the same time, they also feed and multiply each other. A situation that former Commission President Juncker described as a polycrisis. And above all, sits the existential threat of climate change, which, if anything, has only become more urgent. These problems are not experienced by countries in isolation. They concern all of us, and they can only be addressed if we work together as a global community. So, today, multilateralism and diplomacy are actually more important than ever. And the European Union has a key role to play here. Our union is founded on the rejection of a coercive approach to international political relations and on the support for multilateralism. The appeal of our values and our social model, our soft power, remains strong. The number of countries seeking EU membership has increased further this year, and most notably with Ukraine. So Europe must resist the temptation to embrace a zero-sum logic of hard power. We must continue to champion positive-sum games. This means keeping our markets open without being naive, working for an effective multilateralism while paying attention to our strategic interests and those of our citizens. Let me turn to climate change, the focus of this year's conference. We are approaching the end of yet another summer marked by extreme weather conditions. The IPCC report from earlier this year has been seen by many as the last warning before key goals of the Paris Agreement fall out of reach. At the same time, Russia's weaponization of energy has seen energy prices skyrocket. Almost half of EU member states have been affected by reduced deliveries, and the European Union is actively preparing for the possibility of further or full disruptions. But even in this crisis lies an opportunity. In this case, the opportunity is for the EU to reduce its dependence on Russian fossil fuels and speed up the green transition. To do so, we must increase energy savings, diversify supplies, and accelerate the take-up of renewables. That is the objective of the initiatives we have taken over the last few months, such as the Repower EU plan and the Safe Gas for a Safe Winter plan. Instead of backtracking on our ambitious Fit for 55 strategy, we are doubling down on energy efficiency and renewable energy targets. At the same time, we must be mindful of how higher energy prices are affecting, in particular, the most vulnerable groups, and provide targeted, effective support to mitigate these effects. The case for a rapid, clean energy transition has never been stronger and clearer. The EU is already a global leader in this respect, and by setting the bar higher, we are pushing other countries around the world to raise their level of ambition. Take, for example, our proposal for a carbon border adjusting mechanism, or CBAM. This mechanism is designed to stimulate international cooperation. It is built on a methodology that looks into actual emissions embedded in goods, which will reward clean production in third countries. And as we have seen, some of our partners are considering introducing their own carbon price as a response to CBAM. CBAM will be integrated into broader efforts, such as an open and inclusive climate club that G7 leaders have agreed to establish. This is just an example of how the EU can exercise its soft power through regulation, or what has been dubbed as the Brussels effect. The appeal of gaining access to our single market is a strong incentive for governments to adopt more stringent climate policies and producers to shift to less polluting processes. This is crucial to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, because Europe can have all the ambition in the world, but it only makes up a fraction of global emissions. So only with matching efforts from our trade partners can we make a real difference in the race against climate change. There are years where decades happen. In Europe and in the world, it certainly feels like we are living through such a year. In the months ahead, our economic and social resilience will be tested once again. But I am confident that the European Union can sail through these troubled waters if we continue to show leadership. 3 words in particular must define our policies: solidarity, sustainability, and security. If we succeed, we will have also increased our standing abroad and, by extension, our soft power. So thank you, and I wish you all a successful conference. Thank you.
Grazie, grazie Paolo. Salutiamo il sindaco, rivolgiamo anche a lui un applauso, deve andare a fare il suo lavoro quotidiano. Paolo Gentiloni ci ha dato un contributo di grandissima qualità, di grandissimo livello. Now I give the floor to Enrico Giovannini, Ministro, per la sua comunicazione.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to President and to Francesco Rutelli for inviting me to address this very important event. Maybe you know the 12 steps developed by the Alcoholic Anonymous to get out of addiction. I will not go through all the 12 steps to get out of an unsustainable path, which is exactly where we are now. I will just focus on the first step, don't worry. The time is limited. Just to introduce my points, I would like to quote the Evangelii Gaudium, the apostolical exhortation by Pope Francis that was published before the 2 very well-known encyclicas, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. A constant tension exists between fullness and limitation. Fullness evokes the desire for complete possession, while limitation is a wall set before us. Broadly speaking, time has to do with fullness as an expression of the horizon which constantly opens before us, while each individual moment has to do with limitation as an expression of enclosure. People live poised between each individual moment and the greater, brighter horizon of the utopian future as the final cause which draws us to itself. And then, sometimes I wonder if there are people in today's world who are really concerned about generating processes of people building, as opposed to obtaining immediate results which yield easy, quick, short-term political gains, but do not enhance human fullness. History will perhaps judge the latter with the criterion set forth by Romano Guardini. The only measure for properly evaluating an age is to ask to what extent it fosters the development and attainment of a full and authentically meaningful human existence, in accordance with the peculiar character and the capacity of that age. This tension between time and space is very clear to someone who is a minister, because we have to deal with emergencies, but we are also asked to set rules, investments, decisions for a long term. And this tension is particularly important in this, for this government for which we have served, that we are still serving, in order to face emergencies, but also trying to implement strategic changes. I had the opportunity in my life to swear 3 times on the Italian Constitution. The first, when I was recruited as public officer, the second as Minister of Social and Labor Issues a few years ago, and the third as Minister of Infrastructures and Transports. And the first thing that I proposed to the Prime Minister to do was to change the name of the ministry from Infrastructures and Transports into Sustainable Infrastructures and Mobility. Names are important. And therefore, together with the change from Ministry for Environment and the other Department of Energy, creating the Ministry for Ecological Transition, these 2 changes that you could say, well, they are just formal changes, stress the point that this government has decided to change the long-term perspective of our investments. As I said, I swear 3 times on the Italian Constitution. The new ministers, the future ministers, will swear on a different constitution. Because this year, we have changed the constitution in order to change one of the basic principles of our constitution, including the rights of future generations and the defense of environment, ecosystems, and so on and so forth. And we also changed the Article 41, which says that the economic activity cannot be done against social cohesion and so on, but also against health and environment. Well, this was a big change. For the first time since its signature, our Constitution has been changed in the articles of principles. But how can we be consistent with these ideas? And this is the first step that I mentioned before. And it is an individual step, which is take seriously the commitments we have taken. If we think in these terms, as ministers, as CEOs, as leaders, and so on and so forth, well, the game changed quite dramatically. One of you has the pin of the 15 Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda, which has been a very important commitment made by all countries in the world just a few years ago, that are now at risk of being forgotten because of the crisis, plural, that we are facing. Doesn't mean that we didn't have crisis in 2015. Of course we had. Of course we knew that the number of crises would have increased dramatically. We know since 1972, when the Club of Rome published the Limits to Growth report. But we are still thinking that the commitments we are made at the international level, and we have made in Italy, even changing the constitutions, are optional. But as Minister Franco clearly said, just quoting the Sir Nicholas Stern report, this is not an option. It's something that we have to put at the top of our individual and common decisions, notwithstanding the crisis, which, by the way, in some cases depend on the unsustainable path of our world. In order to be concrete, because as Francesco Rutelli said, this conference needs also to exchange experiences, let me say that over the last 18 months, we have tried to change quite dramatically the way in which our ministry works, but also the way in which this government works, and I hope the future governments will work. Let me just give you a few examples of that. First, the do not significant harm principle, which is one of the basic principles of the EU Next Generation. But the entire budget for 2021-2027 is a very tough principle. And we have decided to test all new investments against this principle, extending the obligation of the Next Generation EU to all other investments, even if they are financed by national funds. We have changed the legislation, we have changed the way in which the projects for future infrastructures have to be done, and the report on sustainability is now mandatory for all investments, public investments. And the new government will implement one of the reforms that were made, the reform of the public contracts. And in that law that now has to be transformed in decrees, the 2030 agenda is explicitly quoted. The principles of do not significant harm are explicitly quoted, but also the other elements of the social sustainability have been quoted, and now all the new future public contracts have to stick to those principles. Second example, the G20 years ago, under Japanese presidency, established 6 principles for sustainable infrastructures. When I changed the name of the ministry, people said, sustainable infrastructures? But this is an oxymoron. How is it possible? Well, the G20 had set up these 6 principles, and we have taken them seriously. This is why we have changed the law and the regulations in order to implement those principles. Just one example on that, people must be involved in decision-making for the key infrastructures that affect their lives. In Italy, the public debate was considered just a waste of time for years, and it was actually, in many cases. But I wanted to re-inject this principle according to the G20 rules. And now all the new big investments need to engage public, local societies, in a public debate, the local communities. And this worked. We have set up the rules, the time frame, and thousands of people have participated in new investments plans for and discussion on these, in particular, railways investments in the north, in the south, and so on. Third, the Fit for 55 objectives cannot be forgotten, as correctly pointed out by Paolo Gentiloni. And with Minister Franco, we decided last year in the budget law to add 36 billion euros to the 61 billion euros that the Next Generation EU has attributed to our ministry in order to complete that kind of plan. Overall, the Draghi's government has put together in 18 months more than 105 billion euros for sustainable infrastructures and sustainable mobility. For example, bringing down to the south the high-speed trains. This is just to say that it's possible if you implement the first step of the 12 steps that I mentioned before. Let me conclude with 2 points. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals have been advocated for years. I contributed to advocate the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a co-founder of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. This has been embedded in European policies, thanks to the work that we have done in preparation of the Ursula von der Leyen's presidency, and now have been embedded in all new European legislations. In Italy, President Draghi decided to issue a directive to the so-called Interministerial Committee on Economic Planning that since 2 years ago is also called Economic Planning and Sustainable Development, CIPES. This directive by the Prime Minister forces all the ministries, when they present to the committee their plans, to test them against the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is a structural change, which is exactly one of the points of the G20 principles. Look at the impact from an economic, but also from a social and environmental points of view. And the very last word is just to say that, as one of the points made by President Bazzoli, the role of local communities. Over the last 18 months, we have been working very hard in cooperation with other ministers, but also with the presidents of regions and the mayors of municipalities and so on, in order to help them to plan their own investments according to this overall view. And this is something that is particularly important for Italy, is one of the steps that I couldn't enter right now, because thanks to the national funds that have been made available by Minister Franco and the current, let's say, the normal regional funds made available by the European Union, Italy will benefit of 136 billion euros for the period 2021-2027 for additional investments, for additional projects, development projects. In other words, as we try to say since the beginning, the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience is an important moment, 5 years plan, very big, very large, 200 20 billion euros, but it's not the end of the game. We have 10 years to transform Italy, and what we are trying to do, we have tried to do just setting the rules that I mentioned, taking seriously the commitments we have taken, could be really something that will transform Italy into a more sustainable country, I hope, in a more sustainable Europe, I hope, in a more sustainable world. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Ministro Giovannini. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also because we need figures and we need hope at the same time, and concrete goals and results. Now we shift to the other part of the world, and I hope we got here he is. Ciao Amitabh Kant. Very, very welcome in our meeting. You see, dear friend, he's a member of our Soft Power Club. I look at my right and I see Ulrike representing Germany in the European Parliament, and Bavaria is around 12 million people. Then I look there and I see Ana Luisa Thompson Flores. She doesn't represent Brazil because she represents United Nations, UNESCO and United Nations. But Brazil is a country around 212, 15 million people. Then I shift to Andoni. Andoni leads the Basque country, around 2 million, more than 2 million people. Then, and I will stop after, our friend from Canary Island, next president of Canary Island, another 2 million people. But Mr. Kant represents 1.5 billion people. And not only because you talked about transforming Italy and, of course, transition, he is the responsible, the CEO of National Institution for Transforming India by appointment of the Prime Minister Modi. And at the same time, he will be the G20 Sherpa representing India. So who could conclude this first part of our dialogue better than you, explaining how the most populated, most strategic, and so important country like India will contribute to our common endeavors. Thank you, Amitabh. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Francisco Rutelli, my dear friend, and a great brand ambassador for soft power. My very distinguished panelist, Mr. Daniel Franco, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, and Mr. Enrico Giovannini, and all the participants here. It's a great pleasure to be in the midst of all of you. Today, one of the biggest challenges around us, undeniably, is the threat posed by climate change. The latest report of the UNFCCC, in the words of the United Nations, is a code red for humanity. How we act today will have a huge impact on the future of our world, which we all have a collective responsibility towards. The key is climate consciousness, climate justice, and climate action. And these principles must collectively guide us in our energy transition roadmap. India has made a very bold and a forward-looking commitment at COP26 in the form of Panch Amrit, the 5 commitments formula given by the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. And India has demonstrated true climate leadership, and our commitment towards reducing emissions have been supported by concrete action. We do not view this as a challenge. We view this as a huge opportunity to transform. And when we are being transformational, we need to be disruptive, and we need to be green, innovative, and responsible. And therefore,
As per the emissions gap report 2021, India is one of the 3 G20 members that are expected to overachieve their unconditional NDC targets. With more than 40% installed power capacity, non-fossil already accounted for about 25% of electricity generation in 21-22. India has also taken lead on many international climate-related initiatives, the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, Mission Innovation, and Leadership Group for Industry Transition. We've pushed in many ways for the National Mission for Transformative Mobility, Clean Mobility, with energy storage systems and battery swapping policy, and we've pushed for clean mobility. And this is critical because India's urbanization process has just begun. In the next 5 decades, we'll see over 500 million people getting into the process of urbanization. While the United States of America has over 1,100 cars per 1,000 people, and the Europe has over 850 cars per 1,000 people, India has just about 30 cars per 1,000 people. And as we move forward, it's necessary that our mobility is very different from America and Europe. In America and Europe, the urbanization process was driven by cars, and therefore urbanization was driven for cars and not for people. Our objective is that we should have public transportation. Our cities should be driven by mass transportation, by cycling, by walking. And therefore, we have pushed for a faster adoption of electric vehicles, which are basically public and shared transportation. And we pushed for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers and buses. We've recently rolled out one of the biggest tenders for e-buses in the world, with over about 5,500 buses. And where the operating cost is lower than combustion buses, and our next tender is through a grand challenge route for 50,000 buses. The Indian Railways, which transports 24 million passengers every day across the subcontinent, is on track to become the world's first net zero carbon emitter by 2030. We are also building dedicated corridors for freight transportation. We are also investing in high-speed regional rails, known as the Regional Rapid Transport System, which will radically reduce CO2 emissions by taking around 150,000 private vehicles off the road. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely confident that India will continue to expand on renewable energy and bring down costs lower and lower. We are amongst the lowest cost producer of renewable energy. India is climatically blessed and has top-class entrepreneurship. But renewable alone is not the answer. It can replace electricity. But a number of sectors are hard to abate sectors which have to be decarbonized, not by electricity, but by green hydrogen. And therefore, refinery, fertilizer, steel, and transport, our aim is to produce the lowest cost green hydrogen and be a global production and technology hub for green hydrogen. Ladies and gentlemen, hydrogen as an energy carrier is becoming crucial for achieving decarbonization of hard to abate sectors. Many sectors such as iron and steel, fertilizer, refining, methanol, and maritime shipping emit major amounts of CO2. and carbon-free hydrogen will play a critical role in enabling deep decarbonization. For other high-emitting sectors such as heavy-duty trucking and aviation, hydrogen is among the main options being explored, with an outlook to be the preferred solution for several applications. So we are using renewables to crack water, produce green hydrogen, and become the lowest cost producer in the world. This has resulted in growing huge momentum towards hydrogen and green hydrogen in particular. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, declining prices of hydrogen coupled with growing urgency for decarbonization means the global demand for hydrogen would grow enormously and will grow by about 400% by 2050, led by industry and transportation. India provides the size and scale, and India provides a huge opportunity because it is able to produce renewable at very low cost. Our distinct advantage is low-cost renewable energy generation and world-class clean power execution capabilities, which makes green hydrogen the most competitive form of hydrogen in the medium run. This means that the cost of hydrogen, which is about $4.5 per kilogram, should come down to $2 per kilogram by 2025 and to $1 by 2030. And that would enable India to be the most competitive producer of green hydrogen in the world. I'm confident that India would emerge as a major leader in green hydrogen because we are looking at not merely the domestic market, but the export markets. We are looking at industrial R&D in electrolyzers and bringing down the cost of renewable further and further. We are also looking at industrial applications such as refining and non-urea fertilizers, which have been mandated to go 100% green so as to ensure economies of scale. Ladies and gentlemen, while we've pushed the limits, it's important that the developed world, which has been committed to financing green transition for the emerging market, should live up to its commitments, which it has made in both G20 and COP meetings. Unfortunately, the developed world has not lived up to its commitments. And therefore, India alone needs average annual capital investment in the range of US $200 to $250 billion to prepare its energy systems for a net zero pathway. The multilateral development financial institutions were all designed for the post-World War II Bretton Woods regime. They are not designed for the post-COVID world, which has to meet the challenges of climate change. They are not designed for risk-sharing models to scale up investment for climate change. Public finance would be required to de-risk private investment. As per the latest requirements, you need sovereign green bonds, but you also need first loss guarantees, you need blended finance by promoting thematic funds with the, and this would all require the equity base of World Bank to be enhanced and of financial institutions to grow in size and scale to enable funding. For investments to catalyze the transformation of both emerging markets, imperative that green investments be distinguishable and that green taxonomy initiatives are worked out. Carbon credit markets must take off, and we already have a very liberal FDI policy in the energy sector, and a number of our young companies and startups have done some remarkable work. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ambitious targets, whether it is the world's largest renewable energy expansion plan with 500 gigawatt of non-fossil installed capacity by 2030, or advancing the target of 20% ethanol blending in petrol by 2025. We are also geared towards scaling up electric vehicles and the National Green Hydrogen Energy Mission. The policies for high efficiency solar cell manufacturing and advanced chemistry cell manufacturing are under implementation. We are also focusing on seamless and flexible integration of renewables with the grid. Many argued that energy storage will be too expensive for India. However, India has pioneered the world's cheapest renewable energy plus storage tenders. The energy transition towards clean sources and low emission energy systems is a major priority for India. And we firmly believe that our experience could also be a role model for other economies and many developing economies and developed economies in moving towards a sustainable energy transition. I can assure you that India will be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. And India will be a leader in climate action and sustainable development. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Amida. You made a very important speech. You showed engagement, and when such a country takes such engagements, I think the global community takes a break, and of course, time is short, but if the engagement is strong, we can do very, very much. Thank you so much for your contribution and for your engagement, and good luck for next challenges you have. Grazie, grazie all'amico Kant. Ora veniamo alla parte conclusiva, ma ognuno degli oratori che stanno per prendere la parola, fatemelo dire in italiano, ha una autorevolezza, una preparazione e una competenza di rilievo internazionale. Sono costretto a chieder loro di parlare 5-6 minuti come orientamento per consentire di essere ascoltati da tutti, 7 minuti chi proprio non ce la faccia nei 5-6. I'm going to give the floor to the second half of this debate. You were challenged by so many important introductions, and you have the responsibility to talk around 5-6 minutes in order to allow people here to hear you, to listen to you, and to clearly understand your message and your proposal. I give the floor to Ulrike Müller, member of the European Parliament.
Thank you, Francesco, dear President Bazzoli, dear Minister, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to introduce me shortly. I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2014, and I'm working in the Agriculture and Rural Areas Committee, as well as in the Committee of Petitions, and also in the Committee of Environmental, Food Security and Health. Our panel is titled on Climate, Energy and Environmental Transition in Europe between 2015 Paris Agreement and the Fit for 55 strategy. Commissioner Gentiloni very well pointed out that we are facing several challenges which are all related to and influence one another. In this context, I would like to add one more challenge to the list: food. Without any doubt, food is a part of its big equation that we will have to solve. The trend in global population growth is well known, so the fact that we will have to grow more food does not come as a news. However, extended periods of extreme weather as the direct consequences of climate change increase the pressure. And very sadly and recently, the effects of Putin's cruel war in Ukraine on the global commodity markets has shown again how fragile food security really is. To take up what Commissioner Gentiloni has said, as the different challenges are interdependent, we cannot solve them separately. It's imperative to understand the interdependencies and to develop holistic integrated solutions. We cannot make climate policy, environmental policy, energy policy, food policy, etc. in silos. Policies need to connect and need to manage interactions. For these reasons, we should not only look at the European Union's Fit for 55 strategy, which focuses on climate and energy. We need an even more comprehensive approach. By the way, this has been wisely taken into account in the Paris Agreement already. Article 2 of paragraph 1b of the agreement clearly says that climate policy should be done in a manner that does not threaten food production. The European Union's approach also is wider and more comprehensive than just the Fit for 55 package. Shortly after coming into office, Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen presented the Green Deal. This strategy not only aims to achieve climate neutrality till 2050, it explicitly links climate and environmental policies to the goal of the green growth and green jobs. This is a wise approach that I fully support. First, meeting the challenge of becoming climate neutral in just 3 decades is a huge one. This will only be possible with innovative ideas and solutions. We need to utilize the collective brain power of our businesses and scientists to make that happen. Most of all, innovation requires prosperity to thrive. Climate and environmental policies, hence, must be facilitators of growth. Second, the combined challenges of climate change are healthy environment, energy, and food security are global challenges. In industrialized countries, most of us are comfortable enough to allow for thought experience about degrowth. However, the reality for most people on this planet is that they are still lacking access on basic goods. For them, degrowth is not the option. On the contrary, they have a right to decent living conditions and still depend on further growth. This global growth will, without the question, outpace any hypothetical degrowth in Europe. So, on the contrary, in the global effort to tackle climate change, I firmly believe that this is our ethic obligation to demonstrate that tackling climate change and environmental pollutions can go hand in hand with prosperity and growth. This is the fundamental idea from the Green Deal. However, as often is in the case, there is some distance between idea and execution. And this brings me back to the issue of food security, or more broadly, land use, including both agriculture and forestry. Here, it all comes together. Land use is a major contributor to climate change, and at the same time, it has a huge potential to store carbon and help with tackling climate change. Land use is a major contributor to environmental pollutions, yet it provides foods, renewable fuel, and materials that we urgently need. We need to find the right balance. Let me be clear, we will not get there by doing less. We will get there by setting the right incentives and by facilitating land managers and foresters to be innovative and to do the smart thing. And despite some good approaches, this is where European policy making still gets it wrong all too often. Despite the will to make policy more interconnected, true is that we have not left the silos yet. Climate policy considers forests are merged carbon sink, leaving behind their important functions to deliver renewable and sustainable fuels and materials that we urgently need to replace fossils and other carbon intensive fuels and materials. Environmental policy demands a drastic decrease in farm input, such as fertilizer, plant protection, disregarding negative effects on food productivity. What is more, this leaves a large reservoir of untapped potential in creating green growth and green jobs. We need to make the transition towards a carbon neutral and circular economy as a success story, one that inspires more countries to follow this path. The war in Ukraine has put security of supply in energy as well as in food back on the European and global agenda with some urgency. The circumstances are horrific, but we must use this momentum to move toward more integrated approaches to get our climate, environmental, energy, and food policy right. Our strength in Europe always has been our diversity and the vast creative potential. The challenges are huge, but now, more than ever, we must allow this creativity to unfold, not by prescribing solutions, but by setting the right incentives for our businesses and scientists to find solutions that work. Thank you so much.
Grazie Ulrike, thank you so much. Now I give the floor to Ivan Martin, who's the president of Orchestra, Basque Institute of Competitiveness. He's working for Repsol, other very important private and public institution, a great expert on energy. I give him the floor after you, Ana Luisa.
Thank you very much, Francesco. And I would like to start with a headline that was said by Minister Franco that I fully share, who is, the final objective is clear, but the transition path is still open for discussion. And I think this is a key message I would like to convey to the audience. No? And I will start with three statements. No? The first one is climate change is a reality. And there is a huge impact in our society if we don't address it properly. There is no doubt climate change is there and it affects us. And in consequences, we need to decarbonize the world, but we need to decarbonize the world at or with the lowest social cost. We need to reduce emissions. We need also to capture the emissions from the atmosphere. I mean, just to remind, Europe represents 14% of the global emission, but represents 33% of the cumulated emissions in the atmosphere. And we also need to avoid transferring emissions from one place to the other. The second statement is that energy is key. Energy is needed and is a basic input for our societies, is a key competitiveness lever for our industries and our societies. It should be affordable, it should be accessible, we need to have security of supply, and it will be obviously totally sustainable. But energy demand is going to grow, and it's going to grow because of two major drivers. First, the increase in population, and Francesco has already mentioned, the increase in population in the world, and also because our citizens want to live better, and a better life means an increase in energy consumption. And third thing is that we are facing a global issue, and a global issue that means global solutions. But we have very different realities. When we are talking in Europe about this issue, we are talking about decarbonization. But we are talking about energy transition in Asia, we are talking about responsible growth. They need to grow, but they need to grow in a responsible way, but they need to grow. And we are talking about Africa is a very different story. It's about access to energy. It's moving from darkness to light. We should remind that there is nearly 1 billion people in the world that have not access to electricity, and there are more than 2 billion people in the world that have no access to clean cooking. So at the same time, I mean, the transition is very different in very different European countries. The situation or the path is very different in Norway, with 100% of hydro power generation, compared to France, where 70% is nuclear, compared to Germany, or compared to Spain. We have very different situations, and therefore the path for transition should be different. Just to remind, I mean, the Basque Country, the emissions of 1 year of the Basque countries represent only 18 hours of China emissions. That doesn't mean that we should not decarbonize. Obviously, we need to decarbonize the Basque Country economy, but let's not forget that we are only 18 hours of what China is emitting. So Europe has been playing a key role. Europe has been leading the decarbonization path of the world. We pushed for the Paris Agreement in 2015 to limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees. We launched the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55. We have recently launched the Repower Europe in 2022 to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels well before 2030. And we are using it as an opportunity to reinvigorate our economies. We are using the green digital transition as a pillar for growth and to create employment. We are doing that with fiscal measures to compensate the threat industries and also the vulnerable citizens. So we are really doing good for the global environment. And in the world, we are also seeing very positive signs. No? The net zero commitments are increasing globally. I mean, in 2018, the countries that were aiming for net zero represented only 3% of the emissions. Right now, in 2021, 2022, 97 countries representing 78% of the emissions are committing to net zero. Europe is committing by 2050, China by 2060, India by 2070, but they are all going in the right path to decarbonizing the world. But the rest of the world has different issues compared to Europe. For example, gas, that has been demonized for many years in Europe, is totally accepted in Asia. I attended the Asia Ministerial Energy Roundtable 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and all the energy ministers in Asia had gas in their energy matrix. Africa is right now, and we have seen recent announcements from the Senegal president, the Nigerian president, and even from United Nations or the Euro-Africa Forum, complaining about what they say is Europe hypocrisy. You told us not to invest in gas because gas should not be used, but at the same time now you are calling us and are asking us to provide gas for Europe. So a little bit of nonsense, as they say. And collaboration that is needed is not happening. We promise developing countries to give them money and give them technology to help them decarbonize, and the reality is that we have not fulfilled the commitments of helping those countries to decarbonize. So I would say I'm a little bit concerned, and I think there is room for improvement. There is room for improvement because we presented to our citizens the promised land and the way we should go. And as I said at the beginning, the objective is clear. We need to go into that direction. But we hid the unintended consequences, I would say the desert journey, to achieve the promised land. And we have created higher energy prices that happened before the Ukrainian crisis. We have hidden the job losses that in the transition are going to be needed, even though in the future there will be job creation. And we are hiding the lower competitiveness of the European industry. Imagine what is the competitiveness of the European industry when we are paying gas at $90, when, for example, the US is only paying $9. We have a big issue. The second thing is that we fought the grown enemies. We fought gas. when gas is needed for renewables. We should invest in renewables, for sure, 100%. We should push and accelerate renewables. But unfortunately, renewables are intermittent, and they don't produce electricity during the night, and they don't produce electricity when there is no wind. So we need gas, because the alternative to gas is coal, who, by the way, is used by some European countries. And also, we fought and demonized oil. When oil is going to be needed, there is the need for at least 50, 60 million barrels of oil in the future because, I mean, oil is in anything in our lives. It's in medicines, it's in plastics, it's in textiles, it's in a lot of things that are needed for our medicines, for everything that we're using in our daily lives. The third thing is that we try to reduce the supply without reducing the demand. And we stopped investing and created a scarcity, and that has created higher prices. And there are countries that will need energy to grow. India, and we listened to the Indian representative before, is going to need energy. And they are not going to be able to reduce their energy needs because they have more population and they want to grow and they want to expand their economy. So we need to focus on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is a must. Fourth, we are creating something that worries me, who is a mineral and material crisis. We are switching to an economy dominated by electrification, dominated by electrical vehicles, where we are going to need lithium, cobalt, neodymium, a lot of materials that are focused or that are produced only on very few countries. I mean, neodymium, which is a rare earth that is needed for the magnets that are needed for the electrical engines, is produced in only one country. And that country is China. So our full economy is going to depend on one country and their willingness to export neodymium. I mean, we have seen the gas crisis. Let's imagine a neodymium crisis or a lithium crisis. The International Energy Agency, who is, I would say, a trusted organization, has published 2 months ago a report where they say that if we want to achieve the objectives we have of electrification of mobility, we need to increase the production of lithium by 40 times. The production of manganese by 20 times, the production of cobalt by 20 times, and the production of rare earths by 10 times. And at the same time, the European Commission is saying that lithium is toxic. But we are speeding up our transition towards electrical vehicles without realizing the mineral crisis we are having, and also the food crisis that we are creating through the lack of fertilizers, or the water scarcity that we are creating also, because just as a coincidence, the places where we produce lithium are places where we have a scarcity of water. So finally, and we are also full of inconsistencies in our society. We have been pushing a lot for renewables and develop windmills, but in certain places, our citizens don't want windmills next to their mountains. So do we want to be green, or do we want to accept having windmills? We have been criticizing and banning fracking, but right now we are importing gas from fracking from the US. We are demonizing, we are saying we don't want gas, but we are generating electricity with coal, who is even worse than. So what we need to do, just to finalize, we need technology. We need to invest in technology. Europe should be the leader in technology. And we need to exploit our capabilities, because in the past, it has been shown that technology can reduce the cost and can bring good things, as we saw with renewables. We need smart regulation and policies. We need confusing and changing regulation, and we need to manage adequately the timings of that transition. We need collaboration, as Minister Franco was mentioning, with emerging countries in order to help them to transition in that area. We need also to educate the citizens about the issues they have in their daily life. And finally, we need to move towards a circular economy and an energy efficiency, as Gentiloni was saying. Thank you very much.
Grazie Ivan. Grazie Ivan per un intervento molto concreto. I give the floor to Ana Luisa Thompson Flores. She is director of the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Venice, member of Soft Power Club, maybe heading to Geneva, but you will come back to Venice in the future. Dopo di te darò la parola a Marzio Galeotti.
Thank you, Francesco. I have to start by saying when I spoke to Elena asking for the time of intervention, and I was told to keep it between 8 minutes, I have to say that I was in a bit of a challenge because I had so much to say about everything in the agenda. So we decided to focus on the first part, the climate, the environment aspect, but I also asked my youth colleagues, as per the UN definition, those that are 35 years or less, to provide me with an image of what they've done the last year, how they've done it, and why they are doing the work they do. So on that note, I would like to say that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I hope my video is worth 1,000,000 words, thus reducing from my intervention time, which I still will use to read off my collaborative development of intervention. So if I can say under your words, la regia, per favore, il video.
Bello. Ana Luisa, can your colleagues stand up?
Some of them are here, yes, they can stand up.
Right, so we greet them. Bravi.
There you have ocean literacy, science, education, UN, collaboration, and culture. So, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. So on this note, I would like to start by saying, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to be here again, and I would like to start by congratulating Francesco Rutelli for organizing the 3rd Soft Power Conference. I will speak fast so that I can stay within my time. I also take this opportunity to express my appreciation to the Mayor of Venice, Luigi Brugnaro, and the Fondazione Giorgio Cini for hosting this event in such a unique venue. Time is running out. Sea level rise, ocean warming, greenhouse gas concentrations, and ocean acidification have reached alarming new records. The need for climate, energy, and environmental transitions, as called for in today's session, is more urgent than ever. Last May, in his video message to the World Meteorological Organization, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres stated that today's State of the Global Climate 2021 report is a dismal litany of humanity's failure to tackle climate disruption. Global mean sea level increased at more than double the previous rate, and it is mainly due to accelerating loss of ice mass. The global energy system is broken and bringing us ever closer to climate catastrophe. This summer has brought this reality even more closer to home, here in Veneto and also in Europe as a whole. On 3rd July, the fall of a serac from the Marmolada Glacier, part of the UNESCO World Heritage Property of the Dolomites, caused a tragic loss of life. Heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and extreme weather phenomena are causing devastation all over the world, notably in Europe this summer, with massive socioeconomic repercussions. In the aftermath of the dramatic event on the Marmolada, the city of Venice, together with the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe and other partners, organized an event at the Galassi Mountain Refuge, close to the Anteleo Glacier, to discuss how different actors can promote the sustainable management of water resources from the mountains to the sea in this age of climate disruptions. This summer has seen record high temperatures around the world, the effects of which do not stop at the water's edge. On the 29th of July, Le Monde's front page drew global attention to the major threats for the Mediterranean. The previous day, in response to these dangerous trends, the UN General Assembly had adopted a historic resolution declaring that access to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a universal human right. All soft power players, be it countries, cities, civil society, companies, and citizens, have a role to play. We already have solutions that can address the climate, environment, and energy challenges, but they require political will as well as solidarity. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time. UNESCO works in an interdisciplinary manner through the sciences, education, culture, and communication to create knowledge, educate, and communicate about climate change, and to better understanding its ethical implications for future generations. The UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe is based in Venice, a city, as was mentioned before, at the forefront of the climate, environment, and energy crisis. As UNESCO's only regional bureau specialized in both science and culture, it works through specialized actions in the two fields, with additional expertise in education and ocean literacy. In addition to the specialized expertise, the regional bureau seeks, as does UNESCO as a whole, to address global challenges such as climate change in a holistic manner. This is the case for climate change, and it is the case for the ocean, where education and science through ocean literacy, in addition to culture, need to come together to propose solutions, concrete solutions. Ambassador Peter Thompson, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean, reiterated the call for action to conserve and sustainably use the ocean resources for sustainable development. No healthy planet without a healthy ocean. People protect what they love, and to truly love, they must understand. Ocean literacy is key. Governments should now be including ocean literacy in national school curricula. On August 12th, Thompson paid us a visit in Venice, including meeting with our youth, discussions centered on radical transformations ahead. He presented nature's baton, a powerful message to be passed on to future generations. Youth must be included in decision-making processes and take part in designing solutions for their future. Human beings live on land, but we can't forget that the ocean plays a fundamental role in stabilizing the climate and supporting all life on Earth. UNESCO, notably its Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, plays a role in this respect as leader of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. UNESCO, through its IOC project office at this regional bureau, hosted in Venice, and the Prada Group partnered for Sea Beyond, an educational program to raise awareness of sustainability and ocean preservation, training more than 600 international secondary schools. As part of Sea Beyond, in May, the Kindergarten of the Lagoon, a new educational program in Venice based on promoting ocean literacy, principles, and interactions with the environment, was unveiled. Starting next September, this initiative, founded upon core ocean literacy principles, with the dedicated attention of Francesca Santoro, today in this room, our senior program officer responsible for ocean literacy worldwide, will be focused to enable children aged 3 to 6 years old to connect with the ocean and become future protagonists of the Generation Ocean. The pilot project can and will be adapted to other local contexts worldwide. This is another example of how the City of Venice, which I would like to thank again, has taken a leadership role along with UNESCO to find solutions and ensure a sustainable and safe future for our youngest generation. This brings me to another aspect of confronting the climate change, one very close to the mandate of our Bureau, and also the concept of soft power, culture. While the growing effects of climate change threaten many expressions of our culture, including the cultural and natural heritage of humanity, culture is also a key renewable source for mitigating and adapting to climate change. UNESCO and our regional bureau are fully committed to addressing the impact of climate change on culture and to enhancing the potential of culture in support of the global climate action. One way we do this is by safeguarding locally rooted knowledge and practices that provide a source of resilience against changing climate conditions and to help protect biodiversity. We also work to transform heritage sites into learning spaces with advantage the knowledge of visitors, including both local communities and tourists, about sustainability, so as to foster behavioral change in support of sustainability. In addition to climate, the environmental and energy transitions will be key to achieving sustainable development. In September, together with our sister agencies, UNEP and UNEC, we launch a training program on green transitions for countries in Europe and Central Asia within the framework of the issue-based coalition on environment and climate change. Green transition, along with climate change, was identified by the United Nations country teams in Europe and Central Asia as a key priority for the region. To achieve such a green transition, UNESCO is working with all its networks and partners to find solutions on the ground, notably in UNESCO-designated sites such as biosphere reserves, global geoparks, and World Heritage Sites, as you saw in the video. These sites can serve as role models to promote sustainable development and protect natural and cultural heritage. Last March, UNESCO and the Aberdeen Foundation, one of the largest asset managers in the world, announced a 3-year partnership. This partnership includes an agreement to fund projects from UNESCO-designated sites. The aim is to promote sustainability through research, education, and innovation. This summer, 5 UNESCO-designated sites in Europe were selected out of the 25 applications from more than 20 countries. We look forward to working with these 5 sites to promote innovation solutions to climate change and green transition. In addition to this, energy transition will be essential to ensure a sustainable future. UNESCO, within the framework of the EU-funded Geophysics project, another example, will be finalizing this summer its work to convert the historical building of Porta degli Angeli in the UNESCO World Heritage City of Ferrara to an energy-efficient building. The historical building will be cooled and heated through a neogeothermal system designed by a group of engineers led by the National Research Council. This type of project results in energy-efficient green solutions, which sets a level of best practices that can be repeated in other structures in Italy, in Europe, and the rest of the world. We stand ready to continue its fruitful cooperation with the EU, notably to promote green transition, sustainable energy, and climate change adaptation. The Regional Bureau Science Unit, led by Jonathan Baker, working closely with colleagues working on ocean, education, and culture, will continue to explore avenues in cooperation with the EU and other partners. We need to work together. Capitalizing on its conveying power, UNESCO can bring together global, regional, and national stakeholders to guide the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Cooperation and partnership, in other words, soft power, needs to happen at all levels, between countries and organizations, but also with the private sector. As with the development of the COVID-19 vaccines, the private sector has a pivotal role to play in confronting the energy and climate changes. I am deeply convinced that the world needs more soft power and partnerships to ensure a clean and healthy, sustainable environment. We cannot let up. We must build on what we have accomplished together and multiply our efforts. And I thank you for your attention and our future collaboration.
Thank you very much, Ana Luisa. Thank you very much to you and your people and your friend, I would say, not only people working for UNESCO. Now I give the floor to Marzio Galeotti. Marzio is Professor of Environmental and Energy Economics all'Università di Milano, Università Statale di Milano, è un economista e posso dire anche un ambientalista. Non ti offendi se dico le due cose insieme? Dopo di lui, alla sua vicina di posto, Barbara Quacquarelli.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Francesco, and thanks for everybody. To everybody. Multilateralism and climate change are two central themes of the Soft Power Club, and because they reflect also my expertise, I chose to share some thoughts concerning, in particular, climate policy, climate negotiation at the international level. The first issue is the following. Although the memory is fading about COP26 in Glasgow, the enthusiasm, the net zero emission goals, even India announced its own target at that time. Soon, at the early November, there will be, Egypt will host the 27th such meeting. Now, experience is showing that climate change is accelerating, whereas progress in climate negotiations is not keeping up the same pace and at times has been perhaps slowing it. So I think that it is important, and there is a big role here for soft power to play in perhaps changing the climate architecture, moving to a different setup that is not based on the Framework Convention on Climate Change of the United Nations and the COP systems. I'm not saying that we should abandon the UN framework, multilateralism that could deal with issues such as climate finance, loss and damage, and so on, but it is clear that mitigation issues should be probably brought to a different level, dealt with a different setup. It is true that political will, ultimately, economic conditions are what determines the attitude of individual countries, but also the architecture is important. And last year in Italy, the G20 climate, I think, gave the signals of the possibility, which I think is the way we should go, of having, climate negotiation move to a different international context, such as the G20. What is important is to design agreements that encourage participation by countries and discourage at the same time free riding. This could be done, or in this system, perhaps we could have it would be easier implement the mechanisms such as Nordhaus climate clubs, implement perhaps a minimum carbon tax as suggested by the EMF. Minister Franco was alluding to the multinational tax, so perhaps that is where we could deal with these fundamental issues. The second thing that I would like to mention is the analogies and differences between climate change and the pandemic. What are the lessons that we can draw for climate change and climate policy from the pandemic? There were also lessons that could have been drawn from climate change negotiations and policy for the management of the pandemics. I think that more effort or thinking and analysis about the analogies and differences between these two international public goods as they are could be helpful. In particular, country leaders and citizens demonstrated that it is possible, that we can make it, we can solve a problem. Should we conclude or perhaps be optimistic about the possibility of solving the climate change problem? Here, differences are crucial. Climate change is more pervasive, is more subtle, it is more diffuse. So there are important differences that make the effort much more difficult. But still, I think that a lesson perhaps is to be learned here. And perhaps the problem could be solved through increased education, raising awareness, and acting on public opinions as suggested originally by Francesco in his initial opening. The other aspect that I would like briefly to touch upon is the European level. The European Green Deal is a big, grand strategy that provided a different reading or framework for all actions at the European level, rephrased or seen through a different lens, the lens of sustainability. Here, certain institutions are clearly inadequate. In particular, I'm alluding to the decision-making process that need to be urgently reformed. Because especially in the field of energy, in the area of energy, we know that the differences across member states in energy mixes are leading to often countries to take political stances in order to preserve or put ahead their national interest relative to the common interest. And therefore, there is the need for reform here. Related to that, we have been spoiled, or we come from a period where we have been spoiled by low energy prices. Energy security was almost forgotten. We thought that it was no longer an issue. Now, all of a sudden, we realize that there are high energy costs, energy security, decarbonization, and the question is to what extent, if anything, they are compatible goals. In principle, they are, because a high energy cost should discourage the consumption of fossil fuels, favoring decarbonization, which is based largely on energy efficiency and renewables, which makes countries energy secure by construction. But still, we see that, in this respect, we are facing a sort of a paradox. Some people thought that in a period of low interest rates, low energy prices, high growth, there was the ideal conditions for investing in clean technologies because capital costs were low. Energy efficiency subsidies could be afforded given the situation of relatively safe public budgets and abundant funds. On the other hand, economists have always thought that high energy prices are the instrument or provide the right signal to reduce energy consumption and therefore favoring the decarbonization. I was reading that there are already estimates about the reduction in gas consumption that has been induced by high energy prices. I think I don't remember exactly the number, but some million of cubic meters. At the same time, I was reading the day before yesterday, that the current energy prices are equivalent to a carbon tax of a couple of $100 rate. High energy taxes are needed in this respect, but at the same time, they risk being regressive to harm households, low-income households, industries, the economies, and therefore there is the need to provide subsidies, which is probably the only logical thing given the urgency of acting. So this provides, rather than a paradox, perhaps a dilemma. I'm going to close with a few considerations. The European Union, I think, that should also improve in its very ambitious goals and actions, Fit for 55 and the like, the communication, the decisions, and to give more firm and clear signals. The taxonomy debate, I think it was did not go according to these criteria. Is nuclear energy carbon-free? Yes. Is nuclear energy sustainable? No. It is unclear. There was a confusion. I think this induced uncertainty that is not good for markets, for climate finance, financial intermediaries, even political economic authorities. So to conclude, efforts are needed to put the decarbonization train back on its track and to make it move fast. This requires all of us Europeans to act both at the European and international level, and I think that it is pretty clear on this basis that there is a wide role that soft power could play here. Thank you.
Grazie Marzio, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please allow me to say that one of the most important personalities in Italy is here, Ministro Franco. He stayed since the very first minute. He showed humility and attention. We must thank publicly. Ha dimostrato interesse ed è una grande prova di eleganza e di attenzione da parte sua. Grazie. T'ho fregato, così devi rimanere ancora per gli ultimi 3 interventi. Che però sono molto importanti. Il primo è di Barbara Quacquarelli. Barbara insegna studi sull'organizzazione all'Università di Milano Bicocca. She's an expert on women role in society and competitiveness, equality. You got the floor. It's a very important issue.
Okay. Thank you for your attention. My topic is about people in general, and people are diverse, with a diverse culture, diverse gender. But it's important, this topic, because climate policies and social policies are interlinked. So we need the right balance between climate ambition and technological challenges and social challenges. So it's important to understand more about people like citizens and workers. And we need to sustain motivation of people during this green transition. And this is important because it's a topic of social scientists, on sometimes of scientists about management, and not only for about evidence from hard scientists. So what we know about people motivation? We know something of new about change management processes. So I want to discuss with you about these tools and how to apply these tools to involve people in this transition. And this is a process. The first process is about education and training. The second is something that we know about the use of social network in this era, because it's about virality, that is not a pandemic virality, but a virality of communication. And at the end of this process, there is the participation and the co-creation of solutions. I explain you in a few words this approach. The first thing is related to education. All of us express the importance of education. But what kind of education? We need to train people, train students, train a business leader, a political leader, train government leaders, but we have to have in mind that motivation of people, of us, of workers, is there is a rational part, but there is also an emotional part. And in the narrative of training, there is a lot of part of climate action related to negative emotions, like fear, like urgency, like terror, the sense of inner danger related to competence, related to the climate change. But I want to underline the importance to train people, also to design a good future. Design a good future involved to express emotion like joy to study in Venice, joy to stay in a sustainable city. And we have to involve people and train on it with different linear learning goals, not only cognitive learning goals, but also emotional learning goals. This is important because this is the basis for virality. It's the final aim, it's involve people. And how we can involve people? If people become ambassadors of a good place to live. And for this, we know some tools that are related to change management processes. The first is the approach. We can't use a top-down approach to involve people, because in this way we have the resistance to change. We can use a bottom-up approach because the problem is to lose the view, the vision. So we need a different organizational design. So sorry, it's my topic. And the different organizational design is that there are some goals that you have decided centrally. And the implementation of these goals is important, the involvement of local communities. So, for example, for a leader, political leader, it's important to decide the overall goals. But we have to imagine that our elected leaders go in workplaces, in local communities, in neighborhoods, to decide how to implement that goals. This is important for differentiation. We have different part of the world here and with different consequences of climate change, but also because it's important that remember that people have to feel themselves as a part of a solution, not only as a part of a problem. I think that it's important in this moment of political, critical climate, political climate, where citizens are fearful about the economy, the cost of living, the food costing, the their fear of an unemployment, to remember that they are part of a solution. So it's important to understand how we arrive with a different training, with a different communication, but also with some tools, also digital tools. We remember that we have a lot of new things that we can use now, also for sharing best ideas, and also to change some implementation at a local level. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie Barbara, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your synthesis. That was not easy, but molto efficace. Now I give the floor to two scientists and at the very same time people very smart in divulgation, information of public opinion. Antonio Navarra and finally Giulio Boccaletti. Antonio is the president of CMCC, Centro Euro Mediterraneo sul cambiamento climatico. He manages maybe the biggest Italian computer on climate. No, not the biggest absolutely, because the other one is a server to mine bitcoins. I think, no, I'm joking. He's managing data on what's happening now in Italy, in the Mediterranean area, and in the world. He spent his summertime in Boulder, Colorado, where the NOAA and other prestigious institution works on data and try to share information, purposes, project, and bringing together science and information of public opinion. Quindi Antonio, a te la parola e dopo di te lo preannuncio subito a Giulio Boccaletti. Giulio is the author of a very authoritative book named upon water, anche tradotto in italiano, acqua. It's maybe the most important book this year at the international level about not only oceans, sea and oceans, but drought, the use of water, water in history. So you are both asked to conclude our meeting this afternoon, so dense, so rich and engaging, with an analysis and proposals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesco, for inviting me, for organizing these events that is always so rich of interesting comments and ideas. And of course, when I was contacted, I told that I couldn't use less than 2 hours for, but then apparently this was the case. So I had to decide what to say. So I decided to show just one picture. What you see here is a classic picture. You know that in order to understand climate, what we do is that we construct advanced numerical constructs that are basically mathematical representation of the Earth climate. And then we can put different greenhouse gases concentration, and then we see what happens. Usually the result is shown in terms of global temperature change. That's what you see here. What you see here is a special experiment. Here what we have done is that we have basically used the concentration of greenhouse gases for the entire 20th century. And then when we arrived at 2020, we have assumed that we have reached net zero. And so we have kept the concentration constant. But as you can see, we get still warming. So basically, that's, I would call that's our climate debt. That is already there. So we are guaranteed another 0.2 degrees warming just because of the greenhouse gases that are already in the atmosphere. And this was the situation in 2020. Every year that we lose, that concentration increases because the curve of the concentration emission is this one. So every day our climate debt increases. And that's what we are discussing today, and that's why it's so pressing that we reach some agreement to do something on two counts. The first count is try to, of course, decrease those emissions and reach net zero as fast as possible because exactly of this process. But the other one, we have to understand that we're going to have climate change, in certain proportion, and we are now investigating the detail of this process to understand exactly what 1 year delay involves for the changing climate of our planet. And this is, of course, becoming increasingly difficult. In order to reach this objective, we require collaboration. The recent events have shown a tendency towards fragmentation, and if there is fragmentation in the global community, collaboration becomes difficult. And this is, of course, a major problem. The question is what we can do. I would say that one of the most probably disturbing things that the recent event has revealed, it is that our cornerstone belief that deep economic entanglement, deep economic relation would bring to the creation of a shared set of values at the international level is probably not going to happen. So this means that we're going to have a fragmented world, but nevertheless, we will have to collaborate. So how we do that in the new world that is arriving is a major point. Remember also that we're talking about climate change. We usually concentrate on the problem, the disasters, but not every country is going to experiment at the same level of damage. In some cases, it may be beneficial. So the change of climate will become a factor, an actor in the geopolitical international relation. I think this will complicate even more the negotiation, but it will add another element of pressure that I think is really important, because if somebody said that war is continuation of politics, what we're seeing today is that economics is the continuation of war. And this means that we have to find a way to get out of the trap in which we're going towards a set of international relations that is a zero-sum game, and we have to go back to a win-win game. Otherwise, we will not solve the problem of climate change. We have to do that because, as you see, our climate debt keeps increasing. So I don't think we have any choice. We have to push forward, but we have to be aware that the environment in which we're going to find ourselves in the next future is probably going to be more challenging and demanding than the last decades. Thank you.
Veramente grazie, Antonio. Grazie. So, final words, dulcis in fundo. It is a British expression, as you know, from Oxford, to Giulio Buccaletti. Before I give him the floor, ricordo a tutti che domani mattina noi ci incontriamo qui alle 10 per lo special event sostenuto e voluto da Bulgari, Digital Innovation and International Dialogue. Saremo quindi qui la mattina di domani con interventi estremamente importanti a partire dalle 10. A te la parola, Giulio.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Francesco, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm conscious that I'm the last speaker between you and dinner, so I'll try to be very brief and hopefully compelling. If you'll allow me, I'll just spend a few minutes on water and just talk about what's been going on for the last few months. You probably have noticed that something's happening, not just here in Europe, where we've experienced a very significant drought, but of course the Yangtze has gone dry, and my American friends here will have noticed for the last 20 years that the Colorado River has been having some very significant problems. We tend to treat these issues as emergencies, but of course there's nothing particularly surprising. Antonio here just described to you a graph that told us maybe 20 years ago that we would have these problems. And what is happening is that water is the agent of the climate system, right? Water does the bidding of the climate system. So the floods and droughts that we see every summer and winter, nothing are but the symptoms of how climate and the climate system expresses itself on the landscape. Now, the promise of the 20th century, which was a modernist project, by the way, was to emancipate us from that variability, right? We built levees to contain rivers, we built dams to collect water when it came down from the sky and then deliver it when we didn't have enough. This country, this Italy, essentially industrialized on the back of the re-engineering of the Alps, which fueled the industrialization of the economy, and that happens in many parts of the world. It's the reason why none of you, I assume, wades a river on the way to work, or that all of you take water out of a tap coming out of the wall instead of picking up a bucket and going to the stream every morning, something that all of our great-grandparents would have done as a matter of course, right? That was the promise of the 20th century, was to emancipate us from the variability of nature that also Antonio was describing. And that, of course, was built on a bedrock of institutions that matter a great deal. Institutions like the property rights that are used to apportion water in a place like the Po River, which has gone dry, or if you think about it, we're in a soft power conference. The foundations of modern international relations, the treaties of Westphalia and Münster, were essentially agreements between sovereign nations recognizing each other across shared rivers, right? So what is going on is, all of us are here to talk about climate change, but the reality is something else is happening, right? Something important is happening, which is that the system of infrastructure and institutions that we've relied on for the better part of a century is failing, right? That's also what's happening. It's not just the climate system that's changing, but the system of infrastructure and institutions is failing. And so what do we do? Well, the good news is that this is eminently manageable, at least for wealthy countries. There's a separate conversation we could have if we had more than a few minutes to talk about the impact, far more dangerous on developing countries. But as far as countries like Italy are concerned, these problems are in fact manageable. But they're not technical issues, right? This is not a technical conversation about just yet another piece of infrastructure on the way to just living our life at the beat of consumption, right? It's something more complicated than that, because it requires changing what all of you see when you look outside the window. The landscape needs to change, right? If you were to compare the landscape of 1890 to the landscape of the 1960s, you would have seen a complete transformation. The promise of emancipation from nature had to transform the landscape in the process. And in a way, that's the same that needs to happen now. And it's fundamentally a political discussion about what should we use the scarce water for in terms of agricultural uses. How much water should we allow to be used for hydropower development, for example? How should we manage our forests? What do people see when they look out the land, right? It's about a conversation about what our homes look like. So it's maybe the most political of issues, right? What does our home actually have to look like? Are we ready, right? And the conference here spoke about the European Union, so I thought I would do a little research before I came here. And the great thing about spending bills, as again American friends here know, is that they reveal the true intentions of the true political intent. You can look at a spending bill and ask yourself, are we putting resources against the things that really matter? And if you look at the Next Gen EU, which is the sort of instrument of investment for the current crisis, there is no question that everybody has gotten the memo on decarbonization. We've been talking about it for the last hour. There's no question that we know we have to transition to a low-carbon energy system. There is also no question that people have gotten the memo on digitization, on the digital economy. You can see an enormous chunk of expenditure going right straight to those projects. But then if you ask yourself, can you see adaptation? Can you see the idea that the landscape of Europe will have to change, and particularly for a country like Italy? Can you see a commensurate and coherent plan for the landscape of Italy and the landscape of Europe? Well, I'm afraid, at least I don't see it, and I've spent the last 15 years working on these issues. And so I would like to propose that one thing that this club and this effort should think about is, what is the political context and framework to think about adaptation, because I don't think we have one. And I'll close just with reminding you of one little story. Jean Monnet was the first citizen on Europe, right? He's the founder of Europe. And he was acutely aware of the fact that the waters of the continent were going to be foundational to the European project, right? He knew that on the way to incremental union, you had to mobilize water. And it started for him in the Ruhr Valley, as you will remember, right? It was a French proposal that instituted the International Authority of the Ruhr. The International Authority of the Ruhr was designed, Monet was a student of FDR, of the Roosevelt Project, and he was a student of the Tennessee Valley Authority in particular, and he embraced this idea that you needed institutions to govern the common resources of multiple nations in order to deliver prosperity and economic development. And so was born the International Authority of the Ruhr, which of course then became the Committee on Steel and Coal of the European Steel and Coal Committee, which then became the European Union. So I think that that story tells us that the European project has in its DNA the governance of the landscape and the governance of the water resources of this continent. The question, and that's the question I will leave you, and it's a question of soft power, because any community that wants to have influence on the world needs to have an answer to this question. The question is, what's the alternative, or what's the different model, a different model different from the modernist project of the 20th century, that will deliver security to the people of this community and offer a model for the world. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Grazie Giulio, grazie Giulio. I think it's a very good conclusion, because the mayor of Venice started quoting some adaptation procedures, some adaptation, difficult, complicated, controversial adaptation project in the city of Venice, and you concluded on that and on other very important suggestions. Allora, grazie a tutti, e se mi permettete di nuovo, grazie fraternamente per la sua disponibilità e garbo al Ministro Franco. A presto, arrivederci.